you'll actually need in day-to-day conversations by dynamically associating them with visual stimuli. You know, the same way you learned English. With Rosetta Stone, you'll start speaking your new language day one, and the app offers both speech recognition and live online coaching to help you practice pronunciation and conversation. It's also available on mobile and desktop, which makes it easy to squeeze in practice where and whenever happens to work for you. Personally, I like to do my lessons right before jumping into writing. Since the app is basically a language logic puzzle, it really helps to get those gears turning. As a special deal for Mother's Basement viewers, Rosetta Stone is offering to take 40% off the asking price of a lifetime all-language subscription, bringing it down from $299 to $179, which is a steal of a deal you don't want to miss, especially considering that a year of Japanese alone would normally run you $143.88. And all you gotta do to claim it is click the link in the doobly-doo today. Like I said at the top of Summer's Trash Rundown, the reason it's taken me so long to get to all these shows is I was simply too caught up in all the great anime airing alongside them. But that's simply not fair to how much went into these anime as well. Sure, it takes remarkable writing talent to craft gripping fiction from an idea as mundane as, say, the life of an eccentric taxi driver or the adventures of a college track team. But it takes an equal talent in the opposite direction to make a concept like a Roman slave gladiator boxes his way through 100 death matches to earn his freedom feel utterly pedestrian and inconsequential. Cestus, the Roman fighter, postures like a dark, immersive period drama a la Vagabond or Vinland Saga, but it plays, at least in anime form, more like a hackneyed sports soap opera sprinkled with occasional nuggets of ancient Roman history trivia and fun facts about the kind of damage boxers used to do to each other before the sport got all regulated and junk. There is actually some decent fight choreography and grounded boxing strategy to be found here, but it's very deep, like ancient Pompeii, under layers upon layers of trashy ash. It says a lot when your CGI looks like this, your 2D animation looks like that, and the script still manages to be your anime's biggest liability. So mired is Cestus's dialogue and mindless daytime TV cliché that this is a real line a real character really says while plotting her revenge against the hero for, quote, spurning her kindness. For context, not that you need to how dumb that is, Cestus directly causes the execution of the closest thing he's ever had to an older brother via off-screen volley of poorly drawn arrows a little over 4 minutes into episode 1. And if you're thinking, golly, that's kind of quick, you ain't seen nothing.
There won't be anything left of you. You've already lost. Let's go!
With a commitment to speedrunning excellence that would outdo even the promised Neverland Season 2 if it existed, which it doesn't, the Cestus anime kicks off by blazing through 8 manga chapters in about 25 total minutes of screen time, not counting the OPs, EDs, and the first episode's pointless cold open. Then, in the middle of episode 2, it long warps all the way to Pompeii in chapter 90, and before that episode's done, it's at chapter 96 and a half, with episode 3 butchering the next 8. All this to set up a single 9-chapter fight that the anime draws out for 3 episodes. You always lose time on those stupid scripted boss fights. Still, the strats here are so efficient that even that's not a run killer. Director Toshifumi Kawase learned plenty of skip tricks adapting Umineko, and the rest of Cestus keeps up that breathless pace to reach a cliffhanger conclusion at Chapter 25 of the sequel manga. So that's 179 chapters total in just 11 episodes, which is probably a world record. I can't exactly go check on the Speed Laserdisc archives, but with its aggressive any % strategy, Cestus basically laps even Hakyu Hoshin Engi's legendary 24-episode, 206-chapter run. In recognition of this possible achievement, I'm awarding Cestus 3 post-Koga Party frat house dumpsters, all of which are a touch too moist to catch fire on account of lava.
Go beyond subscribe.
Welcome back. You're about to win.
Here goes! Show some love to your favorite creator. Click join and become a channel member. You get all your main skills. Colorful cakes, gelatinous masterpieces. Join so they can make more of what they love. And you can choose some members of goodies, like the secret banana I guess. Who knows? It's up to them and you. Join the channel, give perks, and show the love.
Colliders, Layered Rolo, a Kit Kat, Twisted, Colliders with cookies and cream. Wow, these are some really cool flavors.
All right, Mom, which option are you going to choose?
I'm choosing the Kit Kat Colliders Twisted. Look at that. It's like a collision of textures and flavors that I love. I love
the name,
it.
Colliders.
Yeah. I want to try them all.
Next up, after watching Fairy Ranmaru spend literally an entire minute of its first episode on 5 guys reading white text against a black background in unison, my hopes were not high for the series' overall entertainment value. But here we learn a valuable lesson in not judging books by covers, including the jacket blurb, because as soon as that exposition's been dumped, this show starts getting nuts. Okay, the overarching story of 5 hot fairy boys learning to navigate the human world does need a bit of time to get going, but the boys' villain of the weekly job in our world is to solve the relatable, realistic problems of forlorn Fujoshi by transforming into even hotter, substantially more magical boys. And because the way the show is paced, it's gotta plow through each of those relatable, realistic problems in one episodic fight flat, it's forced to explore them with a slight degree of abstraction, exaggeration, and some might say batshit insanity. For example, in the first episode, the very real societal issue of Japanese students ganging up on individual classmates and driving them to isolation and potentially suicide through bullying is represented through a single multitasking mean girl quad-wielding smartphones and laptops stuffed with enough sock puppets to trick her romantic rival into thinking their entire class hates her. Also, in the delightfully unsubtle, abstract Madoka space made of eyeballs and social media feeds that represents this conflict, the villainess attacks our hero with a Frieza death ball that is the Twitter logo.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
The following episode follows a female manga artist whose skeezy editor at Not Shonen Jump replaces her magical boy protagonist with a lolly magical girl by redrawing her entire manuscript himself, I guess? Which gets her fired when it flops, but the day and her job is saved when a magic muscle man in assless chaps righteously crossfire hurricanes his way through physical manifestations of Moe itself to kick that one creep's butt and solve sexism in the manga. Also, side note, those Moe manifestations appear to be a digi-count-out
We've reached this world together.
Is a weird thing to see in 2021. Weirder still to see twice, though Akiba's Trip HD at least has the excuse of being decades old. None of this is smart or subtle or particularly helpful in expanding the viewer's understanding of these underlying issues, but it sure is fun to watch and describe, and I'm willing to bet this show's target audience will find as much catharsis in it as I do in anything that panders this hard to straight dudes like me. Especially looking at the anime's production value. Fairy Ranmaru's not always visually striking, especially not when it's a text-only PowerPoint, but from the instant each episode's central fairy twink smooches and inhales the sad girl of the week to transform into a JoJo clunk and save her from her lady strike, it really pops off. Those transformation sequences put the horn levels and nipple fidelity of the lechiest ecchi you can name to shame, and the fights that follow are always fun and energetic, with mad effects animation and gorgeously over-designed graphic art backgrounds. Like, yeah, it may not all tie together into the world's most cohesive metaphor or story or basic logical progression of events or whatever, but that dude sure is fighting an army of evil Van Gogh sunflowers under the starry night sky, and that other dude's wrestling the heck out of that Picasso horse bull. I'm willing to bet that 99% of battle ecchi anime enjoyers view this show off without a second or even first glance, thinking it's just not made for them, and it is absolutely not, so that is a totally valid response. But if you actually, or at least ironically, enjoy the battle ecchi genre itself for its very anime excesses, its hilariously transparent target audience pandering, or its often brilliantly boneheaded writing, and not just because you like it when the cartoon kitty go boing boing, then Fairy Ranmaru has a lot more to offer you than you may realize. Including lore every bit as beefy as the cakes on screen, but I don't want to spoil that, or any of the later episodes' equally bonkers Monsters of the Week, because this show is a rock. For true trash connoisseurs, it may just be the most exquisite dish of the spring season, which is why I'm giving it 4 towering trash can infernos, fueled by stacks of special yaoi books soaked in cheap sake. It's not the only contender for the season's trash crown, though. Battle Athlete's Victory Restart is a remake of a late 90s TV reimagining of a slightly earlier 90s OVA series about budding lesbians in crop tops and leotards doing sports in space. At first blush, it seems to be pretty typical in its trashiness, just another attempt at ecchi with art so bad it borders on body horror, but once its story gets going, that poorly drawn facade quickly peels away to reveal a face of abject madness. So the premise goes, in the distant future, as a substitute for war, girls from various human colonies are sent to a special university satellite where they must compete in various absurd athletic contests for the title of Cosmo Beauty. It's kind of like G Gundam, only way more homoerotic and way less sane, which, if you've seen G Gundam, you know should be impossible, and yet, here we are. Despite its lack of fighting in giant robots or otherwise, the cast of Battle Athlete's Victory Restart is also clearly cut from the same fighting game story mode cloth as that of G Gundam. Each girl hails from a different planet in the solar system, and each one has their own largely unrelated and improbably melodramatic backstory and motivation for entering the tournament. There's a girl from Venus who has to compete for her family's honor on cyborg limbs after losing an arm and a leg to a hilarious CGI truck accident. A teenage doctor from an impoverished colony ravaged by disease who seeks to use the position of Cosmo Beauty to build hospitals back home. A refugee from a civil war on the moon wants to use the position to end the fighting, and the daughter of the arms dealer supplying both sides of that conflict, who just happens to be roommates with the refugee girl, wants to make her family stop selling. It's unclear why she's there. Also, Roger, the kangaroo from Tekken, is here for some reason. The protagonist, Kanata, is your typical I love sports and friends and family type girl, and her goal is to fulfill a promise to a mysterious albino chick she met as a child. Coincidentally, there's a mysterious albino chick in the contest too, but probably not the same one. This girl, Ava, is secretly a genetically engineered amnesiac super athlete who's being used to nefarious ends by a shadowy organization of evil cyberpunk businessmen, one of whom is a gorilla man who munches bananas and beats his chest Tarzan style in the middle of their sinister plotting. This is some real 90s Saturday morning cartoon type thing, which makes it a bit jarring when they force the albino amnesiac girl to strip down in front of them and talk about her like a piece of meat. Or a piece of banana in the Gorilla Guy's case. Like, seriously. That's an actual line of his. Also, they plan a lot of terrorist bombings, which this grizzled detective kind of guy is looking into. So, of course, they try to assassinate him by sending a hilarious CGI truck crashing through the wall of his favorite bar. And just in case that doesn't work, they also put a bomb on the hood of the truck. Not like taped to it or anything, it's just sort of sitting there as it plows through several tons of brick and glass, which focused squarely on the weird space sports and school-life comedy aspects of the concept. A choice I would call creatively misguided on the grounds that a story about a kayak race between a cyborg and a GMO super soldier where the goal is to shoot a giant whale with a fireworks plunger gun doesn't really need the additional complication that one of the girls is concealing an invisible regular gun that her childhood friend, who is a terrorist, gave her to assassinate her roommate. Also, side note to the Battle Athletes staff, as they are from the moon, these terrorist characters could have been any skin color other than brown. Just saying. This is perhaps not as bad as the original anime's sole African girl being a semi-feral wild woman who runs around on all fours and bites meat straight off the bone, but like, not remastering the racism was also an option. That glaring issue aside, though, this mix of Yuri Light school sports comedy and hard-boiled cyberpunk detective drama is at least a solid gold basis for unintentional comedy. And the hilariously god-awful production values and 11-year-old aspiring artist who just discovered hentai anatomy only enhance that comedy. Battle Athletes Victory Restart gets 4 bins of 90s anime doujins and crumpled tissues that were festering in the back of an old comic shop until the owner burned it down for the insurance.
Introducing the shorter side of YouTube. Watch and create your own short videos.
While we're on the subject of abject madness, I'd like to take a second to tell you about Osamake, the rom-com where the childhood friend absolutely will not lose. An anime which, as you might guess from the title, attempts to be a sly satirical subversion of harem and rom-com genre tropes, but instead succeeds at being a rather intense work of psychological horror. It's a Silent Hill sort of situation that places you in a familiar setting, surrounded by seemingly familiar character archetypes, but everything just feels ever so slightly off. Like something alien and incomprehensible is pantomiming our species' social and mating rituals for its own perverse amusement. Nobody on screen ever behaves like a rational or even irrational human being. Surreal and nonsensical events constantly pass without comment, and I'm pretty sure several of the characters are at least capable of being serial killers, even if they haven't tried it yet. As Osamake begins, we learn that Sueharu Maru has already turned down his childhood friend Kuroha Shida's confession because he's crushing on their classmate Shirokusa Kachi. She is a teen writing prodigy and published author whose debut work shook Maru to his very core and instantly made him fall for her. Well, that and her innate great value Mai Sakurajima charms. Unfortunately, just as Maru's planning his confession, he learns that Shirokusa's already gotten herself a boyfriend. A popular teen actor, no less. In response, Kuroha offers to help him get revenge on Shirokusa for the crime of not taking the feelings a classmate she'd barely spoken to never told her about into account before deciding to date someone else. That's some incel shooter logic right there. Lucky for this video's monetization prospects, their method of revenge isn't nearly that severe. Instead, Kuroha just pretends to be Maru's girlfriend in order to make Shirokusa jealous, which is obviously just an excuse on her and the anime's part to shake her stuff in his and our face as frequently as possible. But, funny enough, it does actually work to help him get closer to I can't believe it's not Bunny Girl Senpai. And that's when shit really hits the fan. You see, while Maru didn't know this, and thus his desire for revenge is still totally deranged, he and Shirokusa aren't just high school acquaintances. She's actually the secret second childhood friend he forgot about from back when he was a child actor. His virtuoso performances in dramas and her daddy's pharmaceutical commercials so inspired her as a young, shy tomboy to come out of her shell that she begged her daddy to pull strings and let her meet him. They made a lot of promises to each other at the time about him acting in something she'd write one day, but then he quit acting forever with no explanation. And so she vowed revenge on him. But not just petty pretend to make out with your neighbor revenge. She went full Count of Monte Cristo. Everything about Shirley. Her personality, her looks, her style, the novel she wrote was meticulously researched and precision calculated to make Maru specifically fall in love with her. All so that she could then break his heart by getting a boyfriend. But in another Shakespeareanly tragic twist, the reason he stopped acting that she never knew, despite all that research, until he told her, prompting her to confess all this, is that acting killed Maru's mother. She was filming a car accident scene one day, and I'll let you guess what happened from there. What? The car hit her? No, don't be fucking stupid. I told you, acting killed her, not an automobile. It missed as intended. She was a perfect actress who always hit her mark. It's just that she hit this particular mark so hard, acted so good, that when she pretended to die, she died for real. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jeff, this is a comedy. It says so in the title. Obviously, that's an absurd scenario that we're supposed to laugh at. And yes, that may very well be true of the original light novels. But if it is, nobody told the anime crew. They play this plot beat 100% straight as a life-altering tragedy that everyone cries about a whole lot while sad music is playing in the background. And maybe playing it straight is supposed to be the joke, but then the show really muddies that interpretation by also having actual identifiable jokes, or at least cornily vague gestures toward the concept of a joke. It's also not the only time the show seems to be completely unaware of how blisteringly stupid its story really is. Like, take a look at this YouTube video of the main character dancing up on a stage. The entire plot of the second act requires us to believe and accept that this performance single-handedly catapulted Maru back into the public eye in an unambiguously good way that instantly opened opportunities for him to jump back into acting and make millions of dollars before he even graduates. Yes, this dance, the one you're looking at right now. Viral sensation. Everyone loves it. Give that man a commercial. By the way, that video was taken during the first arc's climax at the school's annual Confession Festival, an event where students get up on stage in front of everyone in order to ask their crushes out with a microphone. We are meant to believe, as a prerequisite for understanding this plot, that not only do kids participate in this carnival of public humiliation willingly, but that the parents and teachers help organize it. I'm telling you, that is at least as incongruous as Silent Hill's Kindergarten Cop High School. Osamake is what happens when a writer possesses intimate understanding of romance as a genre, but only distant theoretical familiarity with romance as a concept and lived human experience. Also humans as a concept. With that said, at least the Mad Lib's unpredictability of it all and the Herculean efforts the all-star cast of voice actors take to sell it make for an entertaining watch. I'm giving this one 3 blazing back alley dumpsters full of discarded love letters and some thick, flat, hefty bags whose lumpy, unidentified contents are starting to smell suspiciously like the. And with that, we have come to the end of spring's trash. Or at least the end of the stuff I had time to look at between the fall rundown and the next Happy Science Roast. Sorry to all the disappointed Blue Reflection Ray and Twooey the animation haters out there, but I do want to make a video about bad video game anime at some point, so I'm sure they'll get their time to What's the opposite of shine? Anyway, thank you, all of you, for watching this roast to the end. I feel like it was worth the wait. And an extra big thank you goes, of course, to Rosetta Stone for supporting its creation. Remember to let me know down below what legendary untranslated video games, or in the spirit of this video, Kusoge, you plan to play with your newly acquired Japanese skills in the comments down below. I'm Jet Thu, professional trash sommelier, signing out from the bottom of a certain religion's bins.
It's time to remind the world what Kingsmen are. The Kingsman, rated R. Tickets on sale now.
I probably owe you an explanation for the lack of hottest trash. Believe me, it wasn't for lack of potential content, but there was just so much great anime on at the same time that I couldn't even think about anything that was Odd Taxi, Vivi, 86, Odd Taxi, Odd Taxi, Nomad Megalodon 2, Odd Taxi, Odd Taxi. I won't apologize for hyping those up or for the kidnapping, but I will apologize for not simultaneously giving me in to the pungent delights of Fairy Ranmaru, Cestus, Blue Reflection Ray, and especially Osomake, the rom-com where the childhood friend nothing quite as exquisite.
Electro Eclipse Bomb!
That I, as a sommelier, was remiss in neglecting. Sadly, the moment has passed, and the summer is now down on newer, smellier, more exciting ventilation, so we too must move on. I may return to cover some all of Spring's garbage next month if there's interest in that, but for now, this is the hottest trash of summer 2021, rated, as always, on an intuitive, highly scientific scale of garbage quantity and burniness. To help you understand how that all works, let's set a baseline with a familiar breed of trash: video game adaptations. Translating interactive stories to non-interactive media is notoriously difficult, and almost everyone fucks it up. But Pokemon made all the money that one time, and anime has never stopped trying since. Scarlet Nexus, a solid new cyberpunk action RPG from the team behind Tales of Vesperia, pushes the cross-media hype train harder than most by hiding codes for in-game rewards within the anime's episodes, which is a neat idea, only slightly hampered by the fact that the show is watchable. For starters, its action scenes are a video game. I'm talking South Park stiff animation set against their empty red void because I guess they ran out of backgrounds. The few backgrounds they do have are all bland and empty, far cry by the cityscape. And if that weren't enough to kill the vibe, the game's distinctive hard jig below 5 beats has been replaced entirely with the most generic anime soundtrack I've
I'll put you out of your misery!
And to top all that off, not only does the story undermine the character relationship of the game's appeal, it also spoils plot points from several hours in at the end of episode 1. This isn't just a bad representation of Scarlet Nexus. Watching it will actually make the play less enjoyable. And the writing isn't even the funny part. I give it 2 extremely damp hospital hampers full of medical. Okay, now that you have a perfect grasp of clarification, it's time for today's ad. This video is sponsored by Konosuba Fantastic Days, a brand new mobile RPG packed with humor, explosive action, and lovable characters old and new who are sure to be useful additions to your party and Aqua. With multiple variants of each character, some with unique costumes, collectors will find plenty to enjoy here. Personally, I'm looking forward to stockpiling rare unions, but there is more to consider than just your faves. Each party member is attuned to one or more magical elements, so as the challenge ramps up, you will have to consider their strengths and weaknesses as you balance your team. Perfecting your party comp is made all the more satisfying by an intuitive blend of real-time and turn-based combat, which lets you rack up crazy damage by precisely timing your skills and buffs. Plus, each hero has a distinct, cinematically animated super skill which can turn tough matches around in an instant using, in true Konosuba fashion, massive, unnecessary explosions. Everyone is voiced by the same fantastic cast as the original anime, and they're joined by several faces from the light novel who haven't made it to the screen just yet. So if you're a reader who's wondering what Iris or Cecily sounds like, now's your chance to find out. The game features an extensive visual novel-style story that recreates the series' funniest moments in expressive live 2D animation before branching into its own plot with its own exclusive cast of characters, all of whom possess personalities bold and memorable enough to feel right at home next to Kazuma and Co. In particular, I'm excited to learn more about Axel Hearts, the new group of idle adventurers at the heart of the game's original story, but beyond them is someone who's been to the whole anime multiple times and has been craving a new season or movie. I'm just stoked to be able to follow my favorite crew of lovable idiots on a brand new adventure. If you feel the same way, then click the link in the doobly-doo to download Konosuba Fantastic Days and start your quirkily comedic anime adventure today. Now, on that note, this wouldn't be a proper trash anime list without Drugstore, Another World, The Slow Life of a Cheap Pharmacist is nothing if not honest in its overall titling. It's about a pharmacist who's about a fantasy world and drugstore how to make his
Come on! Leave it to me!
obviously want to buy that. Also, boy, is it ever slow. Get ready for bleeding-edge recurring gags like, okay, get this. Children are annoying, and they like petting animals, right? So what if they did that to one of the anime girls with the animal pits? And the pharmacist guy, he gives all the kids he makes these sensitive prescription things, but then the Ara Goku secretary renames them to silly food things that sell better. Not doing it for you? Well, hope you like prop comedy. I made a stinky monster repellent spray, so now my werewolf mascot thinks I can power. For some reason, I made pepper spray, but it got me my eye. And who could forget the classic, oh no, super glue makes people sticky too. If you've always wanted to see low-effort Dragon Quest LARPers recite sitcom gags that were stale when I Love Lucy was on, you should probably be on a list, but this is the isekai for you. If not, it may still be worth watching, if only to find out that a true neutral, pure 5 out of 10 anime really works. Drugstore Isekai gets one standard steel trash can full of crackers, room temperature, lightly salty. There is another Isekai on this list, and I'm kind of disappointed to say that, because for a couple episodes, Seirei Genshoku's Spirit Chronicles might actually. The first episode did make me unintentionally burst out laughing when the reincarnated heroes followed by an even more dramatic zoom out to the exact city that to be there. And the edgy, grimdark twist where the peasant boy who saved the princess gets tortured by four Soviet royal guards was about as predictable as it was. But then the story started leaning harder into exploring the dichotomy between Ryo's reincarnated memories and the person he is now. It started expanding on the magic side, the world's politics, even building decently believable relationships between Protag-kun and his peers. Yeah, it still did the thing where the comically evil spoiled rich kids make life hell for the poor kid at the Magic Knight Academy, but they can't really do shit because he's that much better than them. But that did work well enough as an excuse to get him on the road doing an adventure, and for a minute, it seemed like that adventure would get really good. There's even a bit where a beast girl slave who he frees while she's trying to assassinate him is like, put my magic collar back on so you can trust me, and his response is just, no, that's really fucked up. Just throw that thing away, please. Maybe the bar for this genre's too low? Either way, it's not long before Spirit Chronicles dips back down below it. Rio arrives at a village of beastmen that, after a tiny misunderstanding, more or less immediately decides to worship him as a god. Then there's a time skip, and when we come back, the cool assassin girl that's forgotten to click assassin while he's learning to fly. You know, like Goku does. Also, he has a harem now. The power fantasy takes the wheel, the plot gets increasingly predictable, and the characters get increasingly interesting in turn, especially. I can't say I'm surprised. This is exactly where the first episode made me think it was going, but the brief detour into fantasy gave me false hope. I'm giving it 3 standard skill platforms, 3-0 graphics, with more on fire until someone splashes some water in there, but not nearly enough to stop it from happening. Another summer show I really wish I could love is D-Side Trauma. Sanzagen's trademark Goku-esque 3D Sakuga looks the awesomest it ever has. Seriously, these action scenes are incredible. They become a long way. And the 2.5D characters in those action scenes are relatively expressive, too. Not to mention, Ripped Hotel in both those clothes and their truly Nightmare World pseudo-sentai. But, the phrase that they use to transform into those, which is also the name for what people with their are. I'm ready to go! What they say with their mouths, very dramatically, every episode, usually a climax is... I don't care how sick those transformation animations or those kicks are, there is no getting over dialogue that stupid. And sadly, that describes all the writing in this mobile game adaptation, Japanese and English alike, which wouldn't be so bad if this was just a dumb superhero show about teenagers donning magical Shibuya fits to fight cool Persona monsters of the week, but unfortunately, D-Side Traumarai also feels the need to do these monsters represent real social issues faced by real teenagers part of the Persona formula. That's why the monsters are called Traumarai, you see. And with exactly the level of writing skill and tact that suggests, Episode 2 tackles domestic violence by focusing on this quiet, nerdy girl who is quiet and nerdy because her cop dad does what 40% of cop dads do out of concern for his finance that. In it, he's decided that he's going to marry the commissioner's son, and she can't say no because every time she talks back to him, he takes it out on her mother. To deal with this, she buys these dream supplements on shady websites, which are actually monster drugs that trigger traumatic nightmare where puppet strings make her be the one that beats her mama. Symbolism! Long story short, she turns into a giant robot sex mummy and tries to skewer her dad, but just in time, Guilty Protest Twin shows up, and he's all like, hey, remember when you tried kickboxing for 5 minutes? That's what real strength is. And she's all like, oh, fuck right, murder's bad. Then she awakens her persona and goes to confront her dad, but not before popping over to Shibuya to buy a top and get piercings. Not just for the obvious visual metaphor, but also as part of a brilliant plan to record 15 seconds of him reacting to that, yelling at his mom about it out of context, so she can... That'll ruin his career somehow, so he stops abusing his children. That's how that works. Thankfully, this horrendous hand-twisting of sensitive subjects is at least consistently stupid enough to be hilarious, as are most of the jokes attempts to be cool, which is why I'm giving it 4 blazing without question, the biggest disappointment has gotta be optimistic. I love me some mysteries, especially the weird stuff, and I've heard nothing but good things about the series of light novels on which this anime is based. ReZero even references to establish bleach blonde waifus, so I figured they had to be good. But sadly, we're gonna have to add I haven't read the book yet, so I can't say. But I can say, with confidence, this show had one of the top 5 worst first episodes of any anime I've ever seen. The animation and production values are pretty good, actually great. But all that polish is wasted on an overlong, corn-riddled turd of a script that starts by ruining a cool airplane hijacking fight scene. 12 different layers of BBC Sherlock bullshit, then does a complete 180 in tone and intensity into tedious school comedy nonsense. Detective Siesta and her newly recruited school assistant are still ostensibly trying to solve a crime in the back half of the episode, but that crime is a school rumor about a first toilet stall that turns out to be a facade for a dude selling Ritalin to track and field kids who is connected to a secret organization somehow. A plot that the episode itself is so pursuing that the characters just sort of wander off in the middle of chasing the villain to put on cosplay, partly so Siesta can get naked at least once before she dies. Not a spoiler, it's in the title, and partly because the show feels compelled to spell out the romantic subtext of their Sherlock and Watson partnership in the most obvious way possible. To be fair, that is apparently an anime original episode, so that's definitely not on the light novel author, but to be balanced, the next arc has more or less all the same problems of wonky pacing and unsatisfying, poorly telegraphed solutions and twists to mysteries. The dialogue also does that otaku pseudo-meta commentary thing where the characters have a self-aware quip ready for every single thing that happens to and around them, which can work in the context of text, but tends to make spoken dialogue grind to a halt. On the flip side of that, 3 episodes is pretty short for a light novel volume, so the show ends up feeling like it's simultaneously watching through the plot and wading through the dialogue. The detective is already dead, can be both intentionally and not, so it's not a total wash, but if the books are really as good as people say, then this has got to be one of the least successful adaptations of all time. I give it 3 lightly smoldering back alley bins full of Sherlock thoughts. If you're looking for something a little for a plot, you might find some pleasure in Kanojo, which has an unusually straightforward Naliamuka is finally happy that his childhood friend Sakisaki has finally agreed to be his girlfriend, but things get complicated when confesses with a Michelin star-worthy Venta after skipping school for like half a year to prepare for that. Sadly, Nalia is too much of a sincere idiot to reject that. But luckily, he's also enough of a sincere idiot to just ask them both to move in with him. Saki's initially against the idea, but Manase's simply too adorable for the closeted 5 redheads to turn down, and so the harem is established officially halfway through episode 1. While everyone in this love polygon is a certifiable moron, they're also more or less aware of their own stupidity, and thus make an active effort to communicate in order to avoid the comical misunderstandings typical of the genre and the show. Instead, girlfriend's comedy is rooted in ridiculous oversharing, and the kind of cringeworthy, over-the-top overtures of affection that you'd expect from a man with a heart full possibly more girlfriend, like buying Saki $1,000 worth of coals in her favorite gacha game, which of course results in 0 5-stars. The humor in the early episodes is a bit hit or miss, lacking as they are in real conflict. Strong, cynical personalities for the schmaltzy, lovey-dovey to play off of. In particular, Nalia's off-the-charts cringe emissions are hard to take without any sort of antidote, but episode 4 fixes that by introducing Hokusai. a busty, borderline narcissistic MeTuber who is so deeply offended by the thought that a two-timing loser like him wouldn't also want to date her if she stages a protest campus in the troubled backyard. Rika hits that Rumiko Takahashi sweet spot between lovably quirky and dangerously unhinged, aka the shampoo zone, injecting some much-needed chaotic horny energy into the show's lawful-stupid status quo. Girlfriend isn't a great anime by any metric, but it is a pretty damn funny one, mostly on purpose, and makes for a very comfy sort of guilty pleasure, not unlike Winter's The Hidden Dungeon or Enter. It is a bit less hilarious and shameless, though, earning just steadily. There is one more, much raunchier horror of this summer that I'm obligated to mention for the sake of but the mother of the goddess Dormitory is really just another hentai stuck in town somehow, and one where the protagonist gets to be so I think that's about all I need to say about that forever. It gets two big yellow biohazards full of an unidentified ooze that will not burn no matter what we try, yet is also constantly emitting smoke.
The lightning of absolution!
Not least, or...
Behold, this is divinity!
I already touched on Battle meeting in my video on Big Dumb Battle Royales, focusing there mostly on the potential of its power, particularly the resident gamer Jesus Joe's ability to have whatever abilities the other person thinks he has. I also talked about the ultra murder weapon story of series that, despite involving two different cases of child abuse and a psycho stalker, is actually... What I wasn't able to fit into that discussion is an in-depth look at the protagonist himself, Akira Shiroyanagi, and that's a shame because he actually differs quite a bit from your typical death game hero, in that instead of being a meek nerd who frets about fighting before he's forced to toughen up, he's just a straight-up sociopath before the game even begins. He spends every minute that he's not playing online argument simulator fighting games. No, really, that's the image the show chooses to open on, seething about real life and wishing it was more like a video game. And once he does get kidnapped or isekai'd or whatever happens to put them in the death game, he's substantially more excited to try out his new superpower than he is scared of dying. Though at least he tries, like, a little bit to avoid murdering anyone he doesn't have to. That said, he does also repeatedly threaten to murder his own teammates and potential allies, mostly just to see what'll happen, something that almost everyone around him just accepts as sensible and automatic. And it's further implied that he's intentionally manufacturing romance flies after a murder waifu to emotionally manipulate her into being an ally. Oh, and the other leg of the anime's apparent love triangle, Ringo, just happens to be a fangirl with Akira's online pro gamer persona. Not because of anything he, like, said to her, but because he was so awesome when he kicked her ass at a video game that she immediately caught feelings. The wish fulfillment vibes are about as strong here as the edge is sharp, which means there's barely any narrative tension to be found, and that is a bit of a problem for a survival game. But what it has to make up for that, and has in abundance, is a rotating rogues gallery of delightfully despicable monsters, each more cartoonishly evil than the last. From a psychotic red-headed femme fatale who exclusively fights in frilly lingerie, to a seemingly invincible bear of a man who believes the weak should serve the strong as slaves, to the death game's gleefully sadistic cat-girl master of ceremonies, Mion, this show's got a knack for concocting charismatic, yet instantly hateable villains who make every predictable victory cathartic and entertaining at the very least. Isn't that what Big Dumb Battle Royales are all about? It gets 4 industrial waste bins full of illegal fireworks and rejected YA manuscripts in 2012 with a cigarette flying toward them in slow motion after being flicked away by a man in a trench coat so he could whip out a matching pair of perennial tattoos. And with that, we've come to the end of today's record. I hope it was entertaining as it was enlightening. I tried to make this one a little shorter than Winter's video and cover more time. So let me know in the comments below which one and why. And while you're down there, don't forget to click those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already, as well as that link to download Kono's Let's join together. I'm Jeff, certified professional, signing out from the
Kick your coffee up a festive notch with Keurig. Home Sweet Home Alone. Now streaming Keurig. Green for love.
There are so many great, new, and returning anime out right now that it's hard to know where to even start. But today, we're not starting with any of them. Because in addition to instant classics like Wonder Egg Priority and Horimiya, this winter contains an abundance of slapped-together, barrel-scraping, unintentionally and intentionally hilarious garbage. And I'm a man with a passion for trashing. Some of the shows I'm about to show you are straight-up awful. Others are just plain weird. All of them, on some level distinct from actually good anime, are entertaining in ways best enjoyed alongside a crowd of pointing, laughing, possibly intoxicated friends. Of course, getting friends together is a big ask nowadays on account of, you know. So I'm here in your buddy's stead to highlight the hilarity hidden in these hopeless excuses for anime, as well as rate them on a proprietary scale of garbage quantity and hotness, so you know how to prioritize your future shit-watching. And I'm starting with the one that should be at the very top of your list. You don't see anime of X-Arm's caliber every season, or even every year. This isn't just any old trash, it's rarefied, finely aged garbage of exquisitely greasy texture with a distinct, piquant after odor. This is the kind of violent mess that you just can't look away from. Angles so tangled they verge on non-Euclidean. It lingers in your mind's eye even after you've pulled your meat ones away, taunting you to imagine how any human being could fuck anything up in this many ways, this badly, at the same time. Gibiate was clearly a product of poor planning and screenwriting, compounded by severely mismanaged resources. Handshaker's nauseating visuals resulted from an ambitious team of veteran animators using technology they hadn't totally figured out yet, in service of a vision that they also seemed to be figuring out as they went along. Look at Weed or Scarred, and yeah, they're still not good, but they don't physically hurt your brain anymore. You can see what they're going for, stylistically speaking. X-Arm's issues start with the fact that it's not really going for anything, or if it is, nobody working on it has even 1% of the talent required to realize it. It bears all the hallmarks of both of these problems, only replace that team of ambitious veteran artists with Visual Flight, a CG studio whose previous commercial works include some environments from Sekiro, some unspecified game design work on other FromSoft titles, and 4 of their employees did something or other on Fairy Fencer F. You may have noticed that none of that has anything to do with making anime, and as you'll see, that's something of a running theme with this show's production team. They were led by a film director who's never worked in animation before, a screenwriter who's never worked in animation before, a stunt coordinator who's never worked in animation before. You get the idea. Basically, this is what happens when a bunch of film and game guys walk into the anime industry and say, "Psh, we can do better." If that sounds like an unfair characterization, bear in mind that it's how this anime characterized itself, with the tagline in its first trailer declaring war against all of the sci-fi series around the world! Exclamation mark, exclamation note. That is already a ridiculously bold statement to be making while adapting a low-rent Ghost in the Shell knockoff whose chief selling point as a manga, judging from its covers, is how naked this one android gets. But when your entire team has basically never done this before, I don't know, maybe aim a little lower. Declare war on Mars of Destruction or Battlefield Earth first, and work your way up from there. X-Arm would still be fighting an uphill battle then, but not all the way up the entire Himalayas in one go. Honestly, I don't know if it actually deserves to be rated under the likes of Mars of Destruction or Abunai Sisters on MAL, even if its attitude does make it very hard to defend. The story it's based on, about a teen boy from the 2010s who gets in a car accident and wakes up in 2030 as a brain in the box with the power to hack any computer that the cops then use to solve crimes, is built on some interesting ideas and has a decent cast of characters that aren't completely butchered all the time. There are parts of this show that are unironically enjoyable if you can ignore the rest of it, which I just can't say for something like, say, Gibiate. That said, the ironic enjoyability of the parts that aren't good, which is most of them, is exponentially higher than most other trash anime. You've seen 7 out of 10 stories with 1 out of 10 presentation before, but you've never seen anything quite this 1 out of 10. You know an anime's special when the frame rate stutters. Making CGI anime look good is complicated and challenging. It's taken decades of trial and error, refinement of process, lessons learned compounded upon lessons learned for the industry to reach the level of Beastars, Dorohedoro, Drifting Dragons, shit, even Berserk 2016. To watch X-Arm is to see all of that progress completely erased by a team starting from behind square zero that doesn't even know how to make regular anime. This show makes mistakes that haven't been made in commercial animation since Initial D Season 1. Its cars actually look worse somehow. Almost nothing about how these characters are modeled, textured, rigged, animated, or composited into scenes is optimized for the demands of TV animation or even correct on a basic technical level. It's kind of impressive, honestly. Visual Flight does have a talented team of 3D modelers. Sekiro proves that, but this show's about as far from Sekiro as you can get, stylistically speaking, and what it's going for is clearly not most of this team's forte. Also, it's worth noting that modeling, rigging, and animation are all very different disciplines with very little overlap in required skills, all of which you need to make an anime. It sure does seem like whoever put the bones in these 3D models just used a basic quick rig tool on default settings and left it at that. Their jaws move up and down along a single axis, that's it. Their lips have no controls and are stuck in a permanent half smile, and their eyes can't do much but blink and stare straight forward into a yawning abyss visible only to them. So if you were hoping to see any emotions attached to this show's dialogue or drama, you're shit out of luck. The star-studded cast of voice actors does what it can to make up for that, but there's only so much that can be done. Conveying pretty much anything besides walking, T-pose breathing, and basic hand gestures seems to be out of scope in almost all of X-Arm's scenes. The one exception is its action, which employs full motion capture. In theory, these scenes should be fairly impressive as they play to Yoshikatsu Kimura and Takahiro Ochi's strengths in live-action stunt work, and indeed the raw choreography of the show's fights isn't bad. The camera work also presents it coherently, even if it is a little basic. Unfortunately, it appears that nobody informed them raw motion capture data still needs to be tweaked and refined by professional animators to iron out any errors in the capture, fine-tune facial movements, and ensure hair and clothes react with believable weight to the captured motion if you don't want the whole end product to look like shit. Or that onion skinning random animation frames doesn't magically make them look cooler or make up for the length of this process. Unless you've got a thing for poorly built puppets, the ecchi elements of this series aren't about to offset any of this. This is the sort of story where the trigger that allows the protag to enter battle mode is two chicks making out with each other, because ass-kicking android Alma needs DNA from her human cop partner Minami to authorize Akira overriding her controls, you see. But, animating kisses is pretty hard, actually, so the animators just clip their mouths into each other and hit it behind a big glowing particle effect. Attempts to be sexy do represent a not insubstantial portion of this series' narrative, and none of them work, but at least most of them are that awkwardly executed and end up being hilarious instead of creepy. When they're not, they just serve to highlight how much fan service writing like this tends to bog down stories and how little it really adds without competently horny artwork to back it up. The shoddy production values end up providing the same kind of litmus test for every aspect of the manga's writing, and most of them don't fare well under it. None of the world building really holds up to scrutiny. X-Arms are supposed to be these out-of-place pieces of hyper-advanced technology that humans can't replicate, but the setting includes sentient AI supercomputers and autonomous, lifelike androids, so the line between them and regular science stuff is almost non-existent. The series also tries to present a messy, Gits-esque political landscape, but the power dynamics don't really make sense if you think about them too long, and it throws around big ideas like the military-industrial complex as little more than cheap buzzwords. All of this is easy enough to ignore when you're looking at cool sci-fi illustrations full of tiny, meticulous technical details, but with only images like this to distract you, the inconsistencies and lazy writing shortcuts scream in your brain. As I said, a few of the questions X-Arm raises and conflicts it puts its characters through are genuinely compelling enough to provoke some interesting thoughts, even coded as they are in the raw sewage of the rest of it. Akira's whole brain-in-a-box situation raises some interesting points about personhood, for instance, and while it is very funny to see Minami react with the exact same expression she uses for bad ecchi gags to almost shooting her long-lost brother-turned-cyborg terrorist in the face, the way their differing viewpoints are rooted in their varying proximity to their parents' deaths is still inherently fascinating. The dumb stuff does tend to distract one from these notions pretty fast, though. Like, in that same scene, Alma has been reprogrammed to help with Little Bro's revenge thing and severed her quantum neural link with Akira to stop him from interfering. The show isn't subtle about that link being a metaphor for hanky-panky, so did Akira just get cyber NTR'd? If only he'd known about today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, he could have... Actually, their tech's not super applicable to this specific sci-fi hacking scenario. I just needed a segue into this ad spot. Luckily, ExpressVPN is applicable to the everyday lives of anime appreciators and nerds in general the world over, like the nerds at TechRadar, The Verge, and CNET, who all named it the best VPN on the web. If you're not yet familiar with the whole VPN or virtual private network concept, ExpressVPN allows you with one click of a button to reroute all web traffic to and from your computer through one of their secure high-speed servers in 94 different countries, masking your identity, encrypting your data, and letting you bypass pesky regional content restrictions. One click to connect to the UK and suddenly the whole Ghibli library's right there. Obviously, you can use this to watch anime, movies, and other stuff on Netflix or other streaming services that's not available where you live, but it has way more utility, like getting around restrictions set by your local network or ISP. Sometimes my upload speeds to specific websites drop off, either because that connection is being throttled for overuse, or my router or firewall is being weird about it today. In these situations, there's just a lot to troubleshoot, but one press of that button is often an easy, quick fix. ExpressVPN is a powerful, versatile tool to have in your web browsing belt. To see for yourself how it can make your internet experience more open, stable, and secure, and find out how to get 3 months of premium service free, visit expressvpn.com/basement or click the link in the doobly-doo today. I have so much left to say about X-Arm. Its every frame is a fractal collage of how not to make anime bullet points that only gets funnier the more technical knowledge you possess about how 3D animation is supposed to work and look. Though many of the mistakes will still be obvious to even the untrainedest of eyes, like how putting PS2 grade CGI people in the same shot as talking head visual novel portraits of characters you didn't have time to model only highlights how poorly the former emulate hand-drawn animation and how stiff and limited the latter are in their movement. This is a show where a villain hangs his own mugshot up as a 20-foot tall portrait in the foyer of his mansion simply because that's how few unique drawings per episode there were to go around. That's not even getting into how the 2D characters stick out like those rocks in a Dragon Ball background, telling you exactly who's going to be around for more than a couple episodes and or get involved in fight scenes. This alone spoils a ton of the story. I feel like I haven't even covered the basics of all this badness, but there's more trash left to get to, and I guess I've got to save something for the end-of-year roast. For now, I'm content to declare that X-Arm is a full-on 5-alarm dumpster fire, the highest honor available in a rating system that I definitely thought about before writing this sentence. Launching this system with a perfect score is kind of bad form, though. It doesn't mean much without a range of lower scores with which to compare it. So before I get into more of winter's hottest garbage, let me briefly touch on some trashy shows that ultimately left me cold. Early on in the season, I thought that Hortensia Saga would make for excellent roasting fodder, but after a chaotic first episode featuring a goofily grimdark werewolf encounter, it settles into the same boring old routine as almost every other generic fantasy anime based on a moderately successful mobile game. So I rate it one kitchen trash can full of stale bread and hair. I had even lower expectations for Project Scarred, the latest potential disaster piece from Handshaker's studio, Go Hands. As I alluded to in the X-Arm section, though, they've mostly figured out how to make their weird art style work at this point, as well as it can work, and the story they're telling is just a generic dystopian action deal where some of the characters have superpowers with martial arts gunplay that's competent but unremarkable. 2 trash cans full of stale bread and hair. Skate Leading Stars is a bad Yuri on Ice clone that invents a new form of AI-judged synchronized team skating in order to differentiate itself from its inspiration and also avoid having to do any research into how the real sport works or is scored. All told, it's a pretty bog-standard team sports drama thing, save for the fact that all of its characters are weirdly mean and irritable, which is sort of funny sometimes, but mostly just makes the series' conflicts feel forced and overplayed. Also, the show's groan-inducing attempts at humor often put a damper on its ability to get ironic laughs. I give it one sizable waste paper bin near a poorly wired light fixture, but with a sprinkler nearby that stops it from getting too interesting. We Cross Diva Alive is a convoluted trading card game anime spun off from the equally convoluted but much better Madoka Magica meets Yu-Gi-Oh! Setting of Selector Infected We Cross, in which teams of 3 virtual idols compete in card game showdowns that are also dance-offs to win both audience approval and more conventional card game points, both of which count toward a greater ranking system. It's not very well explained. There's a lot of comic potential in that weird premise, and the character designs range from absurdly horny to hornily absurd, but the story so far is just predictably dull friendship and optimism-driven idol stuff. From what I've seen, I'm gonna give it 2 convention hall bins full of booster pack filler and discount idol dojins directly under an air conditioner. That's how not hot this trash is. But should the series pull some sort of on-brand dark twist, maybe we can flick a cigarette butt in there and see what happens.
What will you design today? Start designing for free at Canva.com.
If you're looking to laugh at a mishandled Moe show, LBX Girls will give you way better bang for your buck. It also starts off in a Yu-Gi-Oh-esque world where everyone is obsessed with the same toy. In this case, pocket-sized, battle-capable model robots called LBX, short for Little Battlers Experience. Our protagonist, Yui, is the only person on the entire planet who has not yet caught the highly merchandisable fever. As the series begins, though, she finally cracks under the peer pressure, buys a toy robot, and gets instantly isekai'd into a parallel post-apocalyptic Tokyo besieged by giant robot spiders. Therein, she discovers that she's become an armor girl, able to wield giant versions of the tiny LBX weaponry against the Nemesis threat, and joins a squad of other armor girls as she searches for a way home. It's a wildly convoluted setup for what amounts to a basic battle road trip series with a cast of generic waifus. For the most part, the plot is rote and predictable moe nonsense, but perhaps because of the baseline absurdity baked into its premise, mundane scenes and conversations often swerve into amusingly surreal territory. Like when a guy who's yelling at his dad for getting his girlfriend killed can't decide if he wants to take a cupcake with him when he storms out of the room. Also, the later flashback to said girlfriend's dramatic, tragic death is a laugh riot. And even when the show drags its feet through exposition and dialogue, which is most of the time, the fact that none of its characters really think or act like rational human beings infuses its slow moments with gently ironic humor. I give LBX Girls 3 big back alley bins full of Gunpla boxes and gasoline. I haven't seen it go up yet, but if it does, it could be spectacular. By now, you should have a firm grasp on how this rating system works, so I will never attempt to explain it again, and if you ask me, I will yell at you. On that note, in discussing the brashest trash of winter 2021, one series is unavoidable. Not because it's particularly remarkable, but because if I don't say anything about it, a few very loud and insistent commenters will. A lot. So, big fat content warning if sexual assault is a thing you don't want to hear about today. I won't get advertiser unfriendly or dwell on this for too long, but use the chapters if you want to skip over it. Redo of a Healer follows Kiaru, the healing mage in a generic Demon King battling RPG party whose fellow big air quotes heroes keep him hooked on drugs so they can use and abuse him, both for his incredible but traumatic to use recovery powers and, you heard the content warning. Kiaru discovers that his powers can be used to heal the world, granting him a temporal do-over at the moment of the Demon King's defeat, with which he plans to take meticulous Machiavellian time revenge on his abusers by letting them do it all to him again for 6 straight months. But after that, he pulls the reverse Uno card on the evil princess, erases her memory, and changes both of their faces so they can go defeat the Demon King on their own in secret and run through the rest of his revenge list while they're at it. It takes the kingdom like a week to track him down. Light Yagami, this anti-hero is not. It's a plot full of excuses, cliches, and holes you could drive Truck-kun through, centered on comically vile, paper-thin personalities, and built atop a laughably contrived fantasy world foundation. Like, this healing magic can regrow limbs, transform people's faces, steal their memories and EXP, and reverse time, but actually healing someone who passed out 2 seconds ago? That's impossible, guy. That one scene makes the near-missing tiny web fingers of Amazing Spider-Man 2 feel dramatic and weighty by comparison, but I don't know if it's all that meaningful a comparison. Sure, Redo of Healer fails spectacularly at telling a compelling or even sensical story, but it's not really trying to do that so much as it is constructing a series of quick, vaguely plausible causal links between staring at a wall and listening to music scenes. This isn't anime, it's hentai. Just hentai with TV-level production values that happens to be using a late-night broadcast slot to advertise its Blu-rays. I don't think there's much point in seriously criticizing a series like this for storytelling or subject matter. I doubt most people watching it are taking it very seriously. Anyone who is likely won't be receptive to criticism, and it's not like it's trying to make a serious statement with or about its questionable content. It's just there for people who are into that sort of thing. And off television, there is way more shocking stuff catering to those same tastes. If they're your tastes, that's between you and Haruhi. But if you're looking for a good shit watch or endurance anime, you can do a lot better. Or worse, I guess. To be fair, though, it is a topic of the now, and you can also do worse or better. There's definitely some solid unintentional comedy to be found here, like when Kiaru takes Flair into hiding and changes their names to Kiaruga and Freya.
And over here is Mr. Hilliker. Good afternoon.
Also, one of his healer powers, what's a YouTube safe way of putting this? It, turns his icing sugar into rare candy. The jokes practically write themselves there. I've heard of grinding before, but this is ridiculous! Fill in the blank like it's worth the XP. Hey baby, I've got your rest bonus right here. Depending on your outlook, the way the story bends over backwards, phrasing, in order to morally justify its protagonist is pretty funny too. Like, every villain needs to be even more cartoonishly evil than a slave-owning serial predator, so if Sugo from SAO is a 9, they all start at 11 and just keep getting louder from there. That said, all the bad guys are bad in pretty much the same way, just more. They don't get much screen time either, and the remaining plot that isn't, plot, is padded out with a lot of slow, basic fantasy questing stuff you've seen 1,000 times before. For a show that tries so damn hard to be spicy, it ends up being pretty bland most of the time. Considering all that, I'm giving Redo of a Healer a rating of 2 soggy, smoldering trash cans and 1 wastebasket full of moldy tissues. There's definitely some dumb fun to be had here for those who can stomach the subject matter, but that's about it. Perhaps it would have fared better, in my estimation, had this winter not blessed us with an infinitely more ridiculous and creatively contrived fantasy harem anime. The hidden dungeon only I can enter is an adventure story set in a Dragon Quest-esque world where everyone is born with innate skills. Noir Stardia's skill, Great Sage, allows him to instantly know literally it all by asking questions of an omniscient wizard who lives in his head. Sadly, he's never been able to take full advantage of this because that knowledge comes at a terrible cost. Agonizing, brutal headaches that can only be cured by making out with a hot girl, like his childhood friend, Emma, who is constantly vocally aching for it. But not his sister, Alice, who is constantly vocally aching for it. Smart man. Follows the rules. After a rich bully steals his dream of being a librarian, Noir's only fallback is to become an adventurer. So he uses Great Sage to uncover a hidden dungeon in which he can grind for loot and train against rare monsters, and once he gets there, is led by psychic whispers to a beautiful, buxom, blue-haired woman chained asleep to the walls. Via telepathy, she introduces herself as Olivia Servant, a famous world-class adventurer who was sealed by the chains of death after defeating a demon here 200 years ago. Those chains will kill her if removed, so she decides to make Noir her apprentice while he figures out how to get her out of there and pass her unique skills on to him. One of these skills, Bestow, allows its user to pass skills on to other people. Another, Editor, allows its user to edit the conditions of any other skill. The last one, Get Creative, allows its user to create any skill they can imagine, instantly at the cost of their life force as measured in LP, which is a pretty hefty toll, but there are ways of recovering life points. Noir just has to do things that give him life, like eating a hearty meal, finding gold or treasure to satisfy his earthly desires, or touching some boobies. I don't have to tell you which of those comes up most often. So to recap, this protag-kun has the power to know literally anything and do literally anything, with the drawback that these abilities will hurt or kill him if he's not constantly experiencing ecchi scenes. You may not think that's a drawback, but just imagine asking your adventuring companion to suck on her ear while a monster is trying to eat both of you, and you'll begin to understand what a fearless hero Google Stadia really is. It doesn't take long before girls are fighting over him. As soon as he turns his first quest in and proves his stuff, Adventurers Guild receptionist Lola decides she wants to have a very close working relationship with him, which bugs Emma, but not that much. She's not saying, "Get your hands off my mans," just, "Hey, leave some room for my hands. And that's a good attitude to have because every other woman they meet also wants to jump Noir's bones, which totally makes sense. Sure, he's so dense that he can make out with a girl every single morning before school and still be convinced she only thinks of him as a friend, but, look, he's protecting him. Don't question it. That seems to be the driving logic of this entire show, actually, and it tends to be pretty tongue-in-cheek about it. Noir's Emoto has magic ahoge that automatically detect when a new harem sloot has entered his orbit, for example. And at one point, he picks up a lucky accident skill that dramatically raises his odds of fumbling his way face or hands first into more life points. Then, realizing its immense, terrifying power, he immediately edits it so it won't interrupt any important story scenes or, like, ruin a funeral or something. Spoofing harem tropes is nothing new in anime, of course, and none of these jokes are particularly clever. The real comic gold in this dungeon lies in its efforts to set up fan service moments. Because despite having built-in excuses like that lucky accident skill and those magic headaches whose only cure is a heaping dose of tongue, the hidden dungeon only I can enter is never content to rest on its laurels or rely on cliches. And it gets real wacky with this stuff. In one scene, a combat instructor rewards Noir for his excellent dodging by sitting on his chest, and then punishes him for complaining about it by sitting on his face. Face sitting, by the way, is also a skill in this world. Lola's rival receptionist, Sarah, is an A-rank face sitter. Gotta watch out for those min-maxers. In another scene, to earn the money and life points they need to cure a death curse that Noir just happened to notice that one of his classmates was under by randomly scanning her, he, Emma, Lola, and an elf priestess named Luna, who, I can't stress this enough, just met them like 2 days ago, take part in a harem dog show run by a very divorced nobleman and his cult of incel shy guys, with the girls performing tricks like warming your master up when he's cold and planting 3 kisses on his lips simultaneously, which seems physically impossible. It's like a D&D Mad Lib filled in by a 12-year-old boy who just found out what sex is last week from an anime and isn't entirely clear on the mechanics yet, but nonetheless thinks the whole thing is pretty nifty. And while this show is substantially hornier in its scripting than even high school DxD, its production values are on average so low that it's rarely genuinely sexy, and even when it is, it never aims above a PG rating. So, with a few exceptions, this is the sort of hilariously trashy ecchi that anyone can laugh at without feeling too uncomfortable. Fun for the whole family when they inevitably walk in on you watching it. The series has some fast and loose fun with its fantasy elements as well. Goofy, weird monster designs and silly skill and stat-related jokes abound. Its cast is also generally fun to be around, even if they are a little flat in their characterization. It's not as strong a fantasy comedy as Konosuba, or even Suppose a Kid from the Last Dungeon Boonies moved to a starter town, but it is funny on purpose, and the intentional comedy helps to smooth out the weight between the most outrageous moments of contrived fan service. By the way, don't miss the after-credits scenes in every episode from 3 onward. They're really something. I'm giving the hidden dungeon Only I Can Enter 4 steadily blazing oil drums for its uproarious, unintentional comedy and surprisingly cozy overall atmosphere. For the greedy trash connoisseur not quite satisfied with X-Arm, it's definitely the season's next best worst thing. That's all I have time to cover for now, but wait, stop the presses. Future Jeff here. After I finished writing and recording this, I saw that Netflix had dropped an adaptation of the ultra-edgy survival game manga High Rise Invasion, and while I'm too busy with other projects at present to properly measure the temperature and quantity of garbage in it, the sloppy writing, sensationalized yet barely animated violence, awkward pacing, time to content warning of 10 minutes, and whiplashing characterization all reek of a hefty, humid heap of the stuff. I'll be talking about it at some point for sure, but if you want to watch it before then, bring some beers. Okay, now for real, that's all I have time to cover. But as they say, one man's treasure is another man's trash. So I'd love to hear what your favorite trash of winter 2021 is, and why in the comments down below. And if you'd like to hear about some good anime you could be watching, like a freak, there's a video on the end card that can help with that. Or you can just watch the worst anime of 2020 again. I'm Jeff Thu, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement. Being can follow with their eyes? The hyperactive animation style of Tesla Note, with its manic model swapping and zip-zoomy camera movement, definitely takes some getting used to, but it's also definitely a style that you can get used to. One that feels like a moderate refinement of what Hololive's been doing with their YouTube character skits lately, and what Sega was doing with Sonic Adventure cutscenes in the year 2000.
Watch out! You're gonna crash!
Which definitely ain't great, but is still infinitely better than giving your characters one animation bone for their entire face. And Tesla Note even leverages the strengths of that style to incorporate cool, creative camera work into its action scenes. It's not a great anime by any stretch, and still on this list after all. The main character is kind of a Mary Sue, the plot about a secret ninja spy ring that made a deal with Nikolai Tesla on his deathbed to protect some reality warping crystals he invented. The different evil secret spy ring is as convoluted as it is Saturday morning cartoon generic, and boy, you sure can tell that some of these animation cycles are captured from people running or walking in place. But the music and sound design's decent, the actors are really good, and you do get used to the animation after a bit. This is just a debatably ugly, mindlessly mediocre piece of turn-your-brain-off action junk food that's funny on purpose about as often as it is by accident. X-Arm is an exquisite fractal nightmare made of bad ideas, misplaced arrogance, and literally zero talent that reveals unthinkable, maddening new flaws every time you gaze upon it. These shows aren't even the same species. I'm giving Tesla Note one secret lab quarantine room full of uncanny valley abominations currently being killed with fire. Now, on the subject of notes, if you were a teenage edgelord in the late 2000s, there is a 100% chance that you were into, or at least aware of, both Death Note and Mirai Nikki. They were the premier journal-based high school limits-free fantasy franchises, after all. And while their modes of action varied greatly, their characters shared a penchant for amusingly bug-eyed monologue. But have you ever wondered what it would look like if Future Diary was Death Note? No. Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, Death Note's creators, Sugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata, answered that question anyway with Platinum End. Mirai is a teenage lad with, ironically, no hope left for his future. His parents died in a tragic accident when he was very young, and he was taken in by a wicked aunt and uncle who gave him the full Harry Potter while they lived off his inheritance. Fed up with it all, he decides to take a long walk off a short ledge and end it all. But just in the nick of time, a gentle, kindly angel named Nase swoops down out of the clouds to save his life and offers him a fancy set of wings like hers that would let him fly around the world at hypersonic speeds. Plus a pair of gem-like arrows, red and white, that act like Cupid's bow and kill on contact, respectively. And all he's got to do in exchange for those fabulous prizes is compete in an itty-bitty little competition with 13 other angel-selected candidates, the winner of which gets to take God's place when he retires in 999 days. Mirai isn't interested in the position or any kind of glory. All he wants is to find happiness, so he's basically the inverse of Light Yagami. But there's no backing out of this job interview once you're in it, and while the competition isn't, strictly speaking, supposed to be a death game, there is a whack job in a Sentai costume acting like it is, so Mirai and his hot childhood friend, who also coincidentally happens to be a god candidate, are gonna have to team up and super suit up to stop that guy. Also, the superhero supervillain's motivation to become God is he wants to revive his emo Yamamoto, who's been frozen in carbonate. Platinum End does offer up an emotionally affirming, surprisingly nuanced exploration of the nature of happiness and universal human struggle to find it for ourselves. But that's buried pretty deep in a story where the protagonist's first act is to brainwash his aunt into wanting to bang him so she'll admit to murdering his parents and then kill herself. A child gets brutalized and murdered on screen for pure shock value, and also most of the Shinigami equivalents have massive asses and titties that they get all up in the camera all the time. And that's when it's not using sexual assault as an excuse for it. Now, what you probably imagined when I said that the Death Note team made a Mirai Nikki clone was a version of Future Diary with some real brains, actual tactical complexity, and thematic weight in place of all the edgelord bullshit. What we actually got is pretty much the same quantity and severity of stupid edgelord bullshit, but with every fight and the lead up to it padded out by agonizingly tedious, seemingly endless dialogue. Every time the show threatens to show us an ironically good time with some of that edgy nonsense, it throws on the brakes and makes you sit there and watch the main character mope for like 20 minutes. Mirai Nikki was nowhere near as good an anime or a manga as Death Note, but at least it was bad in a thoroughly entertaining way. Most of the time, Platinum End is just bad. It even manages to have a more insufferable protagonist, which I thought was impossible. Like, imagine if, instead of just making shitty, spur-of-the-minute decisions that fuck everything up for everyone, Mirai Yuki made you wait while he agonizes over the philosophical ramifications of his potential actions in future action scenes, and then when they finally get here, he still makes the shittiest possible decision when the chips are down. I hate this guy. If you enjoy being intermittently bored and infuriated, Platinum End is the anime for you. If you like being entertained, I mean, it sure does have some moments. And if you've got some buddies to fill in the gaps between them, you may have a real good time with it. But you'd probably have a better time watching a bigger, dumber battle royale. I give Platinum End 4 bins full of happy science spirit interview books, which are smoldering but not blazing. Ghost and yokai hunting has become an increasingly common theme in anime over the last few years, and between heavy hitters like Mob Psycho 100 and Mieruko-chan, it's become increasingly important for newcomers in the space to do something bold and different to differentiate themselves. Toilet-bound Hanako-kun offers clever little inversions of classic urban legends. Kimono Jihan injects shonen action into its supernatural mysteries. Inspector went for a bunny girl senpai